Alexi Sanicero says, did any of y'all have any doubts that Ancelotti would be able to do such a great job he's done so far? I've definitely had my doubts since our squad was virtually weaker than last season, but they're now on top of the league with high scoring games. How excited are y'all for the rest of the season?
So I mean, I don't know if I'm nearly as high on Ancelotti right now as everyone else is, and this is really one that I feel like would only possibly be, I guess, feel vindicated depending on things how happened later in the season. But it might be a case, right? We correct course and it never happens and things look better. So it's a bit of a weird one to analyze, but man, like I don't think people understand how awful we've been defensively, like to start this season. We can just look at the league, and we are fourth worst in expected goals conceded over 6 games, and we are by far the best offense in the league at the top in terms of XG scored. And when we're 3 XG ahead of the closest offensive competitor, like that's huge, yet we're only fifth in expected goal difference per 90 when you put expected goals for and expected goals against. Now, there's a lot of noise in only 6 matches played, but I think it's fairly obvious when you watch Real Madrid play that it's all offense and no defense. And so I guess, like, in a sense, like that's an easy way of upping the offense, right? Just trade one for the other, right? If you don't pay much attention to defense at all, you can get quite a lot going offensively. So I don't know how much I actually admire necessarily about that approach, because when you put two together, it's not like it's making us at the moment, far and away, like, league leaders, right? Like what that level of offense you'd think would do. And when I say league leaders, I mean in terms of underlying performance. But what clearly is also contributing to this offensive boost is Vinicius. And now Vinicius and Benzema are both overperforming quite a bit. I think the interesting thing for people is that Karim Benzema is actually overperforming the most. He has about 3 XG in the league season, and he has 8 goals. That is not going to sustain across the entire season. Benzema's on average like a slightly above average finisher about, and we've certainly seen him have his finishing problems in the past, so that's not going to sustain. And then Vinicius, it's a little more balanced, I guess. 2.7 XG, 5 goals, but that's overperforming by 200% about. That's not going to sustain. Yet Vinicius's XG per 90 is still incredibly high, right? It's still 0.51 in the league. Benzema's at 0.83. These are good numbers, right? And so, Benzema 0.83, he hasn't been that high in a long while. I suspect it'll dip down a little bit. But Vinicius, just even, let's say, matching his XG, which is probably something I think we can expect across the entirety of the season, that is, like, I think a real reason for kind of a sustainable offensive boost. And it's part of, our offensive record so far. Like, there's a lot of noise, right? There's a lot of sacrificing defense for offense. And then there's something here with Vinicius that I believe can sustain even when he comes down to earth a little bit. Higher XG and just finishing at a respectable rate. And that, I think, credit has to be given to Carlo. Obviously, most of the credit always goes to the player because they're the one out there. But it does really seem, Matt's written about this, I've talked about it before, we don't need to keep going into it, but the whole one-touch, two-touch thing, as simple as it sounds, Vinicius really seems to have been able to take it to heart. And then along with the other stuff he's done, working with psychologists and stuff, I think credit goes to Carlo there. I think that is the most important thing he's done so far. And that's what I've been impressed with the most. And that was a big question mark for me, right? Like, okay, everyone was talking about how Zidane handled Vinicius. Did he handle him well? And could Ancelotti come in and upgrade that? And I don't know whether Zidane could have done better, but it does seem like Ancelotti's found something here. So that's the most impressive thing for me. But in terms of just being blown away by everything that's happening, I'm way more tempered, because I think literally everything is happening for us offensively. Not only do we have the highest XG in the league, we're overperforming again by close to 200%. if I'm remembering correctly. So we have 11 xg, 11.4 xg, and then we have 21 goals scored. So
Yeah.
not quite, but around there, right? So we're it's this is why it's so difficult to analyze stuff in the beginning of the season, because it's just everywhere. There's so much noise going on, and which is why I'll like when we're 15 games into the season, and let's say like all of this holds or something like that, and the xG is still this high and the defense gets better, like I'll be a little more into it. But for now, everything is super, super cautious for me. I don't have a lot of hard conclusions, a lot of hard thoughts about Ancelotti besides being, concerned with the defense, and then, wondering how, when we fix the defense, can we also sustain what we're doing offensively. So that's where I'm at. Probably not what a lot of people want to hear, because I have not seen Madridistas on this much of a high since 2018 Champions League final. Probably, not even. I don't even think, the league win in 1920 probably matches it. Like people are super happy right now. And what I'll say is enjoy it. Right, what you see on the pitch happened. The blowout versus Mallorca was fun. Enjoy it. Feel what you have to feel. But if you're asking me from a more objective position, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, before Real Madrid, become the team you want them to be this season and challenge really hard for titles.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Madridistas should enjoy it. I mean, they haven't had. You're actually. It's an interesting point to bring up that even the title-winning season of 1920 wasn't necessarily as exciting as what we're seeing right now. And Real Madrid fans are very happy about what they're seeing on the field. And I think most Madridistas, and I mean overwhelming majority, most Madridistas, would rather see terrible defense than just buckets and buckets of goals and you're outscoring your opponents. And that I think everyone would be okay with that, so long as it coincides with winning. But in a lot of ways, we on the Managing Madrid podcast, we are the necessary evil. We are the heroes that this fan base needs, because we have to come in and just question it and balance it and just kind of be party poopers. Me personally, I find the first 2 months of every season probably the most challenging as an analyst, because I'm not entirely sure what is real and what isn't. And it's hard for me to kind of know beyond, like, I need to see larger sample sizes of almost everything. There are certain things that I feel like I can say with almost certainty, but not with 100% certainty, because, who knows? But things that I'm kind of confident about is that I don't think we'll see this version of Asensio all season. I don't think Asensio as a center midfielder experiment works against better teams who can actually punish you in midfield and defensively. I don't think, just by the sheer law of math, that our offense can sustain what it sustained. I mean, in a lot of ways, what we've seen from Ancelotti's Real Madrid so far is what I predicted before the season started, but it's an exaggerated version of that. I predicted worse defense, better offense, but I didn't know it was going to be this extreme bad defense, good offense. And I expect that to normalize somewhat. Now, what I would say is, like, you were saying, like, if we're outperforming our offensive expectations by 200%, I would hope that by Christmas you're also saying that, and by June you're also saying that. That would be my hope. But I don't expect that to happen. But what I will say is, I wonder if we're going to assume that the offense drops off a little bit, are we naive, or do you think it's reasonable for us to assume that the defense will also improve and that will balance it out a little bit? For the defense to improve, we need to have a better press. We need Ferland Mendy back and healthy and consistently there. Same goes with Carvajal. And I think we probably just need to read the defensive assignments a little bit better in the defensive gambles and these step-up interventions. It's been hit or miss with those, right? Those are the things that need to improve. And I just hope that with familiarity, with, just time, if the offense is going to cool down, then can we at least get a better defense? Do you think it's reasonable to assume that?
Well, I don't think the defense will get worse, really. So I would assume just, through repetition, understanding a little more like the different formation Ancelotti wants us to defend in, a lot more 4-1-4-1 we've seen so far this season. And then the return of someone like Ferland Mendy will have some kind of effect. Probably not as drastic as people think without structural improvement, but it'll have some level of effect. So I do see amount of improvement, but considering we're like, literally bottom 5 in defense in the league, I think it's not about just making a little bit of improvement. It's like, can we make significant strides? Because, given all the defensive problems we've had, whenever Real Madrid have been a contender, it's been like top 3, top 4 defense in the league, even when we considered ourselves to have defensive issues, right? Like the 16-17 season was not necessarily like the most consistent defensive season, but I think we were top 2, we were top 3, right? So Barca, Atleti were the ones ahead of us, if not top 2. So that's the kind of, defensive issues we can be okay with and live with, right? Like imperfections on that level, it can't be like this. So we're not just talking about moving to mid-table level defense. It has to be like, at least in the Europa League, let's say. So I'm not really worried at the moment of like, okay, what happens when the finishing variance goes against us a little bit, or like we drop back to normal, because we're not going to sustain at 200%, right? We might do 110, 120%. Maybe Vinicius just, has really figured it out, and he overperforms his XG by a decent amount by the end of the season. You know what? That's expected. What is nice about this is that the XG is really, really high. And what I'm really interested in is, okay, yeah, the finishing will fall off. We'll need to make some defensive improvements to maybe make up for that a little bit. But can we sustain that XG still, right? With those defensive improvements is the bigger question for me. Because if we can do that, then we're talking about an extremely dangerous team here. Because based on these numbers so far, we're far and away the best offense in La Liga. And that's the bigger question, is not so much like the finishing versus defense. It's like the underlying ability to create these chances versus, improving the defense. And if we can only see, like, let's say a little bit of offensive fall off with a major defensive improvement, then there's like things are looking up for this team. But it remains in the air, because at the moment, for me at least, some of it looks like we're able to generate so much offensively because we don't really care that much about defense. And, if a team does that with Benzema, a renewed Vinicius, coming off the bench, right, they're going to create goals. It's the challenge of modern tactics is how do you balance things and try to have your cake and eat it at the same time.
Just to put a bow on this conversation before we move on to the next question, Alexis had also said that our squad is virtually weaker than last season. I think it's inarguable that defensively it is weaker. And I'm not even talking about from a tactical perspective, right? I'm actually talking about from, like, you can't lose Ramos and Varane and not expect a massive drop-off. That's, like, inarguable. But I do think that, and again, I'm not even talking about tactics at this point, I'm just talking about pure squad. I think we're better offensively for 2 reasons, maybe 3. I think the Camavinga signing helps our build-up quite a bit. And the other thing is that I think that Vinicius, to me, it feels like a new signing this season.
It's completely different. I mean, his impact is like stratospherically like greater than
catastrophic. Not catastrophic. Catastrophic for the opposing teams, maybe.
Yeah, for the opposing teams, right? But it is like he's a completely different player, right? Because the most important part of the game for an attacker is creating and finishing chances, and he's finishing them at an incredible rate and also getting into good position. So like that alone puts us in clearly a better offensive situation. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, that was basically it. Anyway, that's where I was going to end, and maybe just pepper in the fact that Vinicius is the hype man right now. I think Rodrigo's been awesome, and if he can stay healthy, I think that's another boost to the offense too. If we can get him consistent minutes, because his offensive contributions have been very good. Jonathan Oliver says, I like questions like this. Takes us back into history. Jonathan Oliver says, hey guys, hope you're doing well. Courtois has been so good since that first year. By the time he's done here, where do you guys think he will rank among Real Madrid keepers all time? I know it's one of our thinner positions, so I'm just curious as to what you think.